Hey, y'all, it's John Mark here. So there's a war happening right now, and thought a lot about should I even comment on this? This is a storytelling project. We occasionally touch on important issues, provide commentary, but at the end of the day, this is a storytelling project. Well, it hit me as I was watching the first 24 hours unfold. It's just a continuous stream of missiles, drones, retaliation, night vision footage, maps with red arrows, slow motion intercepts like replayed over dramatic music. And if you're like most people, your feed is absolutely full of it. But here's the problem is that when we focus on the feed, the thing that's trending right now, we have a tendency to lose sight of the most important questions. And that matters to this project because war looks very different at ground level than it does in the headlines. So hopefully that answers why we're talking about this. But if not, we'll go an extra layer deep. So, why is a storytelling project about war talking about information and media? Well, here's the answer because that is war. And if you're like me, your friends and family are probably asking, for your thoughts. It's totally understandable. We have veterans, we have experience on the ground, and it's completely reasonable and appropriate for our friends and family to kind of expect us to have an answer. Now, I've kind of given this some thought over the last 24 hours. As a vet, like, what's my responsibility here? Do I even have a responsibility? What can I say? What can I not say? I guess I'll say that my experience is that with wars, there's always been two fronts. There's the kinetic fight, what most people commonly associate, with a war. And then there's the narrative fight. One determines terrain and the other determines legitimacy, political will, funding, escalation threshold, ultimately how history remembers it. But, in this particular case, we also have like a pretty big midterm election coming up. So now if you've worn the uniform, you already know this, right? At least I hope we do. The story told afterward very rarely matches the experience inside of it. And that gap, that tension between reality and narrative is exactly why this show exists. Like right now, we're watching something striking, like inside of Iran, reports suggest that internet restriction, information blackouts, state controlled media putting out information. And that's one model of control. Some of you may really disagree with what I'm getting ready to say, but you know, we have our own model of control here in the United States. And it's the opposite problem. We're talking total saturation, 24/7 coverage, social media threads, Telegram channels, TikTok war analysts, anonymous officials leaking to the press, think tank hot takes, AI generated maps, leaked intel, counter leaks. Like, we're not starved of information. We're drowning in it. And like, here's the uncomfortable truth. Information scarcity can distort reality, but so can information overload. Different mechanisms, same vulnerability. Now, I say this because someone who's quite relevant in the current time because of the current administration and the people working in the information space. He's a prominent figure, and his name is Steve Bannon. And he described this strategy as flood the zone. And the idea wasn't to win the argument, it was to overwhelm the environment, create so much noise that the referee can't keep up. We, as the audience, we can't prioritize. Some would argue that there is a diffusion of accountability. Now that's of course, in a political context right now. But let's apply that to war. Like when conflict begins, what happens? Again, you mentioned leaks, counter leaks, shifting casualty numbers, flips without context, dramatic footage just flood the zone. And what disappears? Strategic clarity. Now, some of you guys have also seen, the documentary Control Room. It was a media coverage during the Iraq invasion back in 2003, focused really on Al Jazeera, the conflict between like Al Jazeera reporters and like the public affairs team surrounding the invasion. It was really interesting, taught me a lot. And what did American viewers see? Well, we saw precision strikes and professionalism of our troops. What did Arab viewers see? Well, they saw civilian casualties and devastation. The battlefield was the same, but the perception was completely different. And that was in 2003, as I mentioned earlier. Now you add algorithms, AI, instant publishing, monetized outrage, influencers with millions of followers. And add on top of that, you now have a very well-financed and endowed political machine that's churning out narrative control from Washington, D.C. and the other major media outlets around the country. And it's all doing one thing. They're doing the bidding of their masters. They're shaping perceptions for not a military objective, but for a political objective, right? So, the only thing that's difference between then and now is structure hasn't changed, but the velocity has, right? So again, like, why do I bring this up in the context of the Iran war? Well, when you're watching the news or when you're looking in your feed, if everything you're seeing like is like focused on explosions, hey, let's take some of those shots at downtown Dubai or, Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, Tehran, so you can see the missiles coming in. I mean that's interesting and that is part of the story, right? But when coverage and our attention centers on that, like I think we miss the opportunity to ask some really important questions. Like, okay, how many missiles? What do you think the objective was? Instead of asking like how big was the crater created or how many casualties were created, maybe we also ask like, okay, so again, like what political end are we actually pursuing? When the government starts bragging about intercepts, okay, cool. Well, so what does that success mean to our overall objectives, right? And I think it's like, we talk also like asking questions about off ramps and what are the second and third order effects. And then I think we also, as we look at, Congress is going to be coming back to work on Monday, and you can bet the political comp space is going to be very charged up. And we have to ask ourselves who benefits domestically from an escalation. What does the country of Iran look like 6 months from now if we're on course? What would it look like 6 months from now if we're not on course? The problem is that in today's information space, these questions, they don't trend. No one cares, right? But these questions determine the outcome of war. Explosions, that's like a tactical thing. Strategy is a much quieter thing. I used to work in the White House, like, during some smaller conflicts. I had a front row seat to see how like political messaging gets shaped, right? And here's the thing that like most people don't understand. Okay, clarity is never the primary objective of any kind of political communications. It's not because people are evil. It's foundational to political comms. These folks aren't evil. They're not vile people. There's no like, villain in the back behind the curtain scripting propaganda. That's not the way it works, right? The messaging for the most part does operate inside of legal guardrails, right? Intel guardrails, escalation, political guardrails, markets, right? There are all these like, things that shape the message. So every public, statement goes through layers of consideration. And by the time a statement clears all those filters, at the end of the day, what you have is pablum. You have something that doesn't provide clarity. Nuance is what's that? Language becomes so careful and it appears to almost be intentionally ambiguous. And I don't think that's incompetence, but that is the result of statecraft, right? That's what governments do. Okay. I don't put a moral value on this. It is what it is. It comes upon us to be able to look at that communications and say, okay, well, we shouldn't accept this as ground truth. We should challenge and question all political communications. The public hears a clean sentence, but the real question is what they don't see are the 1,000 calculations that are behind it. And when that sentence lands in an environment already flooded with hot takes and dramatic clips, people who are seeking to monetize their opinions, people who are attempting to flood the zone, people who are attempting to score political points, appealing to the biases of their audience. Okay, it becomes a witch's brew. It becomes a very low information environment. You know, you it makes it very easy for communications to become weaponized in that regard. And I guess for me, when you see those guardrails up close, like you stop expecting clarity. And so one of the things I've been thinking about is like, okay, not really caring what comes out of the White House. Honestly, like I don't care because I'm looking for sources of information that give me clarity about what's going on the ground. Always asking the question, okay, but what didn't he say? Right? Or what didn't the Iranians say? As a good question to kind of drive me to think more critically about what I'm seeing. But there's something else I think that's happening here is a bit of a cognitive trap. Seeing more footage and seeing more booms and explosions and all that stuff creates the illusion of understanding. And visibility does not equal comprehension. Okay. Sorry, high arousal content feels important. It ain't. Okay. All it serves to do is to activate people. So, because it comes back to like, the initial question, which is why the heck are we talking about this in the beaten zone? We stood it up to really focus on ground truth, people's personal experience in conflict zones, not just soldiers, not just Americans, but also civilians, also, folks from other countries, and to try to get the fullest, most comprehensive view of like what conflict really is. And, someday, we'll be able to bring in a guest who had personal experience and, they're going to tell us their story. their personal truth. But before we can do that, I think it's important that we actually pay very close attention to what all the institutions, whether it be the government, the political machine, the Department of Defense, industry, people with an interest, put out to try to shape perspectives and narratives, right? And then, like, at the end of like this whole thing, we will then be able to take those personal stories and we'll be able to take our accounting of all the stuff that was said to kind of lead us up to the war, to shape the narratives during war. And then we can ask questions about, like, why they said that and hold them accountable. And for me, like, that's how we break this cycle that we're in right now with all this, the toxicity out there and all the lying out in the information environment. So, just remember that. And I think, so when I watch the news and when I start formulating opinions, I have to really tell myself to slow down, listen, don't put pressure on myself to form an opinion. When people ask me a question, hey, what do you think? Because they think I might know something about it because of my experience. I don't put any pressure on myself to say anything beyond like what I feel confident about saying, right? And why is that? Well, because every single time I offer an opinion, every single time I go onto a platform like this, every time I go on to X or wherever and retweet, share, I am now a participant in this information war. Every share, reaction, headline, without, anytime I want to send something or comment on something without really questioning it, I become a participant. And I like to think that I'm pretty serious about the study of war through stories. And so, that's why I take both sides of this whole thing seriously, the storytelling side, but also contrasting that with what the institutions, what the politicians, what the people in the industry, and what the political comms guys and gals are saying, people with interest. And I think it's extremely important to do that. And it comes down to discipline, right? So, challenge to myself, and I share this with everyone else. I'm not preaching, slow down, try to separate events from narrative. You know, what outcome are they trying to achieve by putting this on the television? Um, Asking myself to, what does failure look like at this point? Who benefits from different types of narrative framings? Is this noise or is this signal? This isn't cynicism. Like, I love it when people say that. It's like, oh, you're just a cynic. Well, no, it's actually discipline. And discipline is something that I think veterans like inherently understand, which is why it's really hard for me to see some of our colleagues in social media just like becoming participants in this really nefarious game and the information. But remember, the things that truly that have a material impact on war, um, you know, are the things that right now people aren't talking about. And if we only watch the blast and we only, try to score political points, we miss the blueprint of the war. Um, you know, and let's not forget the people in Iran. It's a very dangerous situation there. I mean, you hear a lot of politicians making a lot of promises now about like, oh, this is your opportunity. Well, let me just tell y'all something. It ain't that easy. Okay. The Iranians are going to need the support of the Americans to overthrow the regime. Okay. Uh, I'm not the smartest person in the world, but I've been to combat operations a few times and I've read a couple of books, and I can tell you that any thoughts that we have of making this a nice antiseptic clean campaign of regime change, I think is highly unlikely. And so, the Iranian people are going to need some more confidence before they're willing to step up and overthrow their folks, in my opinion. So again, this comes back to clarity. Like if the president of the United States gets up and says it, like you'll never get another chance like this. Well, that's not enough, boss. So we need to be very disciplined in how we consume information, but also when we talk to people who are generally curious because they think we're experts, it's a responsibility, right? It's a responsibility. And we need to think very carefully about what we say, how we take information in, and, be very strong, mature, and aligned. Not because we, have any obligations to an institution. Nope, not at all. It's because we have personal pride and we live by values and we understand the seriousness of war. And that if we understand that, like, if we launch into a very bloody conflict, we might have missed an opportunity to take a different course or to execute more intelligently. had we demanded that our politicians slow down. And, anyway, that's all I have. I'm just sharing some raw thoughts on this. You know, Big thing for me is like the decision's been made, so I'm not going to litigate the decision. That's not my place. But as we go into execution, I'm going to be paying very close attention to how like this is all packaged and the information in space. And I'm going to provide some updates of some of the, big trends that I'm seeing, some of the things that we should be asking questions about. And yeah, and then just a reminder to myself and, is just to when I'm asked questions or given an opportunity to become a participant, that I carefully consider my words, I think that therefore I will have done my duty, and I'd be proud of my contributions in that space. So thank you all very much. Um, my thoughts are very much with our men and women who are overseas right now, performing their duties. My thoughts are very much with the people of Iran right now, who are entering a very dangerous phase. And, my thoughts are with our leaders that they make good decisions.